Welcome to episode 112 of Closer Mentality. I'm your host, Julia Mellett. Infrequently on this podcast do I tell stories of researchers informing the pedagogy of sport. Today's guest, Dr. Julie McCleery, serves as an example of the people far from the sidelines who are working to make sports science more inclusive. Without further ado, meet Dr. McCleery. Dr. McCleery was surrounded by sports from a young age due to her father's role as an athletic director. Though she gravitated toward individual sports like gymnastics and cross-country, a high school interest in basketball proved overwhelmingly right.
I started playing basketball my sophomore year in high school, and that was my very first team sport that I did. And I loved it, and I wish, I was okay at basketball for someone who hadn't played it. Like, can you imagine now starting a sport at 15 years old? Like, that would never happen. So I played varsity basketball for 3 years, never having played the sport. So anyway, that's I think a big difference, which I guess is both good and bad, because now if you don't start playing basketball at 8 years old, you're probably not going to get the chance to be on your varsity team. But so that was kind of my trajectory through youth sports. And then I was a good basketball player. I was a good track athlete, but not good enough to play at the school that I wanted to go to, which was Georgetown. And they're D1 and both of those things and really good. And that's where I was introduced to rowing. And that's where I started rowing.
McCleery was accepted to Georgetown University to study English. And that's where she found the highly regarded Hoya crew team. Georgetown, renowned for rowing since the boat club's inception in 1876, allowed McCleery to walk on the team.
So I rowed at Georgetown, and then I graduated and I stopped rowing for a little bit, in part because I wasn't big enough to be a real rower, a rower in the open weight category. Those rowers are, 6 feet tall, at least 5'10", taller and heavier than I was. And I didn't really want to be a lightweight rower, because that's what I would have to be. And I was sort of in between the weight that you need to be for a lightweight rower. So I took some years off, and then I decided, I think 2 years after my graduation from college, to get back into rowing, and I started rowing again with the intention of training for being on the national team. And so let's say I started training again in 1994. Now everybody knows how old I actually am, but then made the team in 1996 and trained kind of off and on through the 2000 Olympic trials. So I trained with a club, which is what a lot of people do. And then the way things worked back then, which I think is still similar now, is you train with your club, you enter races, you submit your ergometer scores, and kind of if you do well enough, then you might get invited to a training camp, like a national team training camp. I think a lot of women go directly from college now as well. They're submitting scores, the coaches are seeing them throughout their collegiate career, and then they're getting invited directly to a US team camp at that time. But for me, I had to put in some work because I had been out of college for a little while to be able to be invited to some of those camps. The big investment in women's rowing as sort of a Title IX balancer for football hadn't happened yet, right? And so I think women's rowing was not as big as it is now in the US. And we were a university supported activity, but I honestly don't remember having access to the training room. There were certainly we didn't have our own boathouse. We shared a public community boathouse, which is a lot of things. It's something that a lot of universities and colleges with rowing, it's hard to get land on the water. So they end up sort of sharing facilities, and those facilities can be far away. We were able to run to ours down on the Potomac. You had to go, down the Exorcist stairs in Georgetown and make your way to the boathouse. But you're really off campus. And so it's also not like a sport where you're right where the training facilities are or the weight room is. And we had what our training facilities and ergs and weights just right down at our boathouse. And so that's all I really remember having. So certainly we've come a really long way in supporting athletes, and I'm sure Georgetown is very different now in terms of what their rowers get.
McCleery, at this point concurrently pursuing a master's degree in education from Harvard University, found herself on the U.S. national rowing team ahead of the 2000 Sydney Olympic trials. McCleery went on to coach for the team as well, melding her passions for rowing and teaching. As the turn of the century ushered in additional opportunities for women's sports in playing and coaching capacities, McCleery saw an opportunity to carve her impact. She began studying female sport inclusion and the long-lasting effects of coaching behaviors on participation atrophy. As of 2024, 43% of women's NCAA-sanctioned sports were coached by women, and 25% of youth coaches were women. Dr. McCleery seeks to find out why. She added a PhD in education policy from the University of Washington to her CV in 2015, and has been investigating the factors at play ever since.
We have such, increased visibility of, women's basketball and women's soccer, for example, and women's rowing in the United States was a dominant force internationally for over a decade. And yet, if you look at NCAA data specifically, you don't see those folks becoming coaches. You see some of them becoming coaches, but you would think with the investment in women's sports and the visibility that more women would want to move into leadership roles and that there would be that trajectory. And so there are a million reasons why that isn't happening. I mean, I can talk about a few of them. One is who's hiring. We tend to hire people who look like ourselves and are in our network, and the majority of collegiate athletic administrators are male. There's a lot in coaching. It's a lot about networking and who you know and being recommended by someone. And if who's there is already predominantly male, and those networks might also be more male and whiter. So that sort of reproduction of who's there based on networks and wanting to hire people who you feel sort of compatible with is one thing. Another thing is that what we find at the University of Washington when we're doing coach trainings for women and non-binary folks, we find that there's just a dissonance sometimes of like when you are one of the only women in a league, or if you are coaching softball and you're standing next to your assistant coach who's a man, and the umpire comes over and says, I need to talk to the head coach, and immediately starts talking to the man, or right, if you get questioned about like why you're there and about knowing the rules, like there's just a lot of these kind of microaggressions that can make a really hard job even harder. So we hear women just sort of saying like, it's a space that I feel like I'm always fighting for something in, and that like I have this sense of like having to swim upstream all the time. And coaching is so hard, right? If you're always feeling like you have to prove yourself, like that parents are doubting you and that people watching you are doubting you. Even athletes sometimes doubt that women coaches can be the best coaches for them. Like there's some research that says that female athletes prefer male coaches, and in part it's because they see that as a symbol of being taken more seriously. Right. So there's just all these things kind of working against you, and that the exhaustion of that, I think, can burn women out more quickly, because coaching is a really hard job. I've been in education my whole life, and I love working with young people, and I love coaching, and I love teaching. And at the same time, I'm always a person who's like, wait, but this is all happening within a system. And if this system is messed up, then like teachers and students can't do as well as they could do. So I've always been drawn to some of those like higher level policy questions. And so that's what led me into studying and getting my PhD in education policy, is trying to understand the way that like the macro level systems create conditions that are or not conducive for teachers and students. And I would say that's exactly the same thing that's happened to me in the sports space, is that I transitioned from doing research. I'm still in education. I would say that doing research in sports, and I still work within a college of education, and I study sports in educational settings. But I started by studying coaches, and then I have become really interested in the policy level work that's like, okay, we can train coaches all we want, but if the system is messed up, if you're training a 10-year-old, baseball coach, like someone who coaches 10-year-olds in baseball, and he learns all the best practices in the world, but his program, sends him to a tournament in Arizona on the weekend with the kids and has them play 10 games and, throw too many pitches, like he doesn't have a lot of control over how that works, right? Like the system, again, is kind of not set up to help him do the developmentally appropriate things that kids need. So that's how then I got more into like the sports policy stuff, and also around like particularly for female athletes and women coaches. But also I'm really interested in understanding how we can create more policy level solutions for making sports safer and higher quality for all athletes, and really believe that it's a missed opportunity for some regulation, like state level or federal level regulation around like coach training in particular.
Dr. McCleery speaks with athletes, coaches, trainers, parents, and athletic directors in an effort to quell participation atrophy past youth sport. Specifically, her niche has become the matriculation of women into all avenues of sport and the intersection of the aforementioned involvement and abusive coaching practices.
The culture of sport is one where we believe in this notion of like people have to be broken down to be built up, right? Like that. I have a colleague who what does she call it? It's like, the egg method, which is like you just take a carton of eggs and you throw them all against the wall, and the one that survives, like that doesn't crack, is the one who like manages their way up the chain into elite sports, and the rest of them break. And that's kind of how we do things. So I think those women are just saying out loud what a lot of people experience at some point, the longer you stay in sport, is that there is sort of an abusive culture problem in sport. And a lot of data would really bear that out, right? Like, I mean, there was a safe sport study in 2020. I think that, so I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say something around like 70 to 80% of USOPC athletes said that they experienced some form of misconduct or abuse during their careers. There's a similar study in England, people looking back at their youth sports experiences, and it's like 75% of them say that they experienced that in their youth sports. And then all you have to do is read like the NWSL report, right? The Sally Yates, the Yates report. It is right there, right? Like, and it says exactly what you were just saying, like that people are like, well, I just thought that's the way sports is. Like, I thought that that's how you get talked to and that's how you get treated. And since nobody did anything about it, I just thought that was normal, right? This sort of shrug it off. And I think that's exactly what we need to try to change, is that like, oh, I guess this is how sports is. We just like abuse people, and if they can't survive it, that's their problem.
McCleery added that the influx of transfer portal additions muddies the results of the studies she conducts. The transfer portal and NIL have become an inescapable variable in her research, and Dr. McCleery alluded to student athletes reacting differently to systems of abuse because of it.
Here's what I hear from college coaches. So we do a lot of training around what's developmentally appropriate, support, like being in relationship with student athletes, creating a positive and healthy culture. Relationships and culture building take time. If you only have an athlete for 1 year, and if you have people coming and going all the time, it changes how you create a culture and how you develop relationships. And what I really hear is coaches struggling to deeply commit to people and processes when those people might not be around for very long. And I think that is sad, because I feel like, from the research that we do and that things that coach educators want coaches to know are these kind of deeper commitments to people and to transformational leadership that really takes time. And now they have less time. And so I'm almost feeling like we need a new way to talk to coaches about these things. So I don't think it's probably not making anyone any more abusive or but it's not giving them the incentive they need to develop the really healthy parts of their coaching repertoire in terms of culture building and relationship building. And that's what I would say. It is making it a lot harder for them as well.
Aside from a plethora of sport pedagogy studies, Dr. McCleery also aids in research on athlete empowerment from the athlete perspective. This includes a 2024 study published in the British Journal of Sport Medicine, specific to female biology and physiological support. McCleery, the lead researcher, worked alongside women from Stanford, Boston Children's Hospital, and Harvard to hopefully lay the groundwork for future research on the physical needs of female athletes, most overlooked by a predominantly male coaching pool.
I think that reflects medicine overall as well, right? So sports medicine is not that different from medicine in terms of research. And there has always been this sense that, like, if you were studying men, that those results were applicable to women as well. And that's just, now understood to not be the case. And so it's just taken a while for us to get there and to understand that we need to be really clear about who the subjects were, who the participants were in our studies, and frame the results accordingly. And then also to be more specific about the populations that we study in medicine and sports medicine, so that we can apply our findings to those populations in appropriate ways. And I think this has gotten, a lot more visibility since 2020 even. And the folks that I worked with on this project, so Kate Ackerman and Emily Krause, are both leading physicians in the sports medicine world and doing incredible work with female athletes. And so it was a great opportunity for all of us to work together to say, okay, we know that research needs to go in this direction in terms of studying female athletes, but what if we actually learn more about what the athletes themselves think would be useful as we're developing a research agenda? And so that was really the impetus of this. Was I'm more of a qualitative researcher and they're more quantitative researchers, and they're physicians, and I'm a coach educator. So I was kind of bringing this more sociological perspective to say, let's co-construct this agenda with the people who it's for and see what we can learn. And so it was a great collaboration and a great opportunity. And Viz, Voice in Sport Foundation, supported the research. So we were thankful to them for doing that, and glad they were able to highlight it and get the word out there.
The study, linked in the show notes, titled Centering the Female Athlete Voice in a Sports Science Research Agenda, incorporates a modified Delphi study, a method of qualitative research akin to a fill-in-the-blank questionnaire. Subjects are asked open-ended questions, and responses are fulfilled in sentence form. McCleery et al. Sourced participants from the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Athlete Advisory Committee, targeting a remarkably niche demographic that had, in regards to the study's hypothesis, never been researched before.
The type of study that we did is called a Delphi study, and it's 3 rounds of surveys, and it's not just multiple choice surveys. It also had a lot of questions, which then they would write responses to. So there's a lot of qualitative coding. So there's a lot of creates a lot of words that then have to be analyzed. And so you have to keep the group of participants relatively small, because imagine if you had 100 participants and they took 3 surveys each, and each survey had 10 questions. It just would take so long to get through everything from a qualitative perspective in terms of analyzing their written responses. Anyway, that's why the population is a little bit smaller than like a real broad population based, like try to get an exact, random sample of all female athletes or all elite female athletes, that kind of thing. So anyway, just to set the context for why we were closer to like 40 or 50 people. And then you kind of just do your best to be as representative as possible. And ultimately we did our best, but we didn't quite hit the mark. So for example, the population was about 80% white, and the population of study of USOPC female athletes is like 65% white-ish. So, and then we had there are more summer sport athletes than winter, but I think we were still overrepresented there. We were a little overrepresented in Olympians versus Paralympians, though not as far off as race. So we used the USOPC Athlete Advisory Committee to help us. At the same time, you can't go out and say like, I want you to do the study. I want you to do the study. You need to protect like confidentiality and anonymity. So you can put out the information and say, this is a study we would like you all to participate in. Please participate. But yeah, so you wish you could kind of pick and choose exactly who you wanted, but that gives you some selection bias as well. So you do the best you can to be as representative as possible, and then write about that in your limitations, that it's not entirely representative of the population, and a lot of qualitative research isn't necessarily.
Of the 40 athletes interviewed, 24 sports were represented, and 6 of those 40 had denoted having experienced pregnancy. Though Dr. McCleery indicated that some teams were more engaged with their representation, she declined to indicate which teams due to confidentiality. In addition to the subject representation being substantive, the backgrounds of the researchers themselves spanned an equally adequate range.
We brought in, a really good mix of folks who were experts in whether it was nutrition or REDS or mental health. I felt like we had a really good representation across like the range of topics, and they sort of gave their opinions about which topics they felt like were understudied. So, and just as context, like the question was to athletes, like how important are these topics for you to have more information about, right? Like where are you missing information that could support your performance and well-being, right? So it's both performance and well-being. And so they could say that they didn't want information about strength training, for example, because they already had enough, right? Or it could be because they don't think there's enough research out there, or maybe there's enough research out there, it's just not getting translated to them. So like why something could get chosen, like really had a range of options. Anyway, that is all is to say from the researcher standpoint, they were saying like, here are some topics we think that either don't have enough research or that research isn't getting translated to athletes. And so we all came up with a list of 17 questions. It was really hard to get it down from even from like 25 to 17, but we managed to get it to 17 topics to start with. And then that ended up with the 14 topics that we landed on at the end.
The eventual 14 topics were as follows:
menstrual cycle symptoms, recovery, birth control, mental health, fueling and the menstrual cycle. So it's slightly different from the menstrual cycle symptoms. Fueling and hydration, physiology and performance. So that's like about physiological testing to attain peak performance. Mental health and sports performance. So that's really like interesting because we already had one on mental health, and that's really about tools and strategies to support athletes with or without mental health diagnoses. And then this other one on mental health and sports performance is helping athletes understand. They were very interested in understanding the distinction between like mental health and mental training for sports performance, and having tools for both of them, and like research on understanding like how were they related to each other. Okay, sorry, I'm describing some of them too much. Team dynamics, low energy availability and REDS, institutionalized sexism, which we should go back to that one because if it sounds like an outlier, there's a reason. Pregnancy and postpartum, injury management, and strength training. And again, each one has like a bigger description to it, but those are kind of the headers.
The recognition of a discrepancy between mental training for sport performance and clinical mental health indicates that the new crop of elite athletes is fully aware of the mental game's role, and furthermore, is intrigued by a subsequent competitive advantage. From a sociological perspective, the inclusion of institutionalized sexism can be extrapolated as a turning point in the acceptance of coaching abuse that sport has been fraught with.
Yeah, right. And that's what's so great, I think, about the Delphi study and this kind of using both the quantitative like rating system, but also the qualitative, the sort of opportunity for actual athlete voice. I mean, that's what I love about it is that they get to tell us like, no, you're missing this, or I would really like to know more about this. And here's my justification for why this is or isn't important to me. So that's the part that I love about it. And so 6 of the final 14, so you'd asked before, like we chose a list of 17, and then it ended up with 14 topics, but 6 of those 14 topics were generated by the athletes themselves, right? So they were new, they weren't part of the initial 17 that we had put on there. And that is a really cool, thing about this methodology. And back to the institutionalized sexism piece, we started with what I would call like a biopsycho frame. Like what we put on there were like biological, physiological, and psychological kind of topics. We did not include sociological or environmental topics. And yet they came up. So that's where this sort of what we shorthanded as institutionalized sexism and team dynamics, those were the 2 that I would say are more sociological in nature, where in terms of institutionalized sexism, there were just a lot of notes and suggestions about like, I want to understand like how having an all male coaching staff and support staff is impacting my performance and well-being. I mean, that's sort of it in a nutshell. Or I want to understand how, like, back to our previous conversation, how male leadership in the sports space, and systems being designed for men is impacting my performance. And so that's really sort of like the macro level of all this, right? If what we're seeing is like not enough research about women, people feel that at like a sociological and environmental level is like, this system, this space hasn't really been built for me. And I think that might like be impacting me in some particular way. So they had that question, like, how is that impacting me? And I think there's research moving in that direction. I think we mentioned this in the paper, there's a lot of conversation about, ACL injuries, for example, and like, is it anatomical, physiological, hormonal, or is it environmental? Like, is there something about where women play and the environmental factors that they're surrounded by that are somehow contributing to this sort of public health issue? So I think it's some interesting questions. This has like obvious parallels in the general healthcare system, right? Like, institutionalized sexism is impacting women's healthcare writ large, right? It's not just about the health and well-being of female athletes. It's about the health and well-being of women in general, particularly around, maternal health and well-being, right? Which is really being impacted. And so it's the political, the social climate that creates what we see at the micro level in our healthcare systems, that we have to attend to as much as we have to train people specifically to have knowledge about women's healthcare issues. So I think there's really good parallels there. It's a good point.
Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless of if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human in this world going through a hard time, therapy can give you the tools to approach your life in a positive way. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. This is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options just in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. If this sounds like something that could help you, there's a link in the show notes to get you started on your therapy journey. It's betterhelp.com/closer mentality. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. Because finding a therapist is a little like dating. If you don't really fit with the therapist matched with you, it's easy and free to switch therapists without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/closer mentality. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/closer mentality. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this channel. Did you know that you can purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore? With Libro FM, you can pick from more than 325,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from real booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there, you know the name. But you'll be part of a different story, one that supports your local community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to squeeze more reading into your busy life. Listen with the free Libro FM app while you do chores, walk the dog, or relax at home. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations from the people who know best, booksellers. Closer Mentality has partnered with Libro FM on a special offer. Through the link in the show notes, you can get 2 audiobooks on Libro FM for the price of 1. Offer only valid for new members in Canada and the US. Thanks to Libro FM for sponsoring this podcast.
In the paper, we measure some of the distinctions between groups on different topics. So a topic like mental health or a topic like pregnancy and postpartum, we measure, were there group distinctions? So like, did the summer and winter athletes answer these differently? Or did the folks who had mental health diagnoses answer these differently? And so there was a distinction, a significant difference in women who had never been pregnant and women who had been pregnant in the pregnancy and postpartum question, the topic, which makes sense. And it almost didn't get included. And that's exactly why Adelphi is an interesting methodology. It's a consensus methodology. So for some women, that's an extremely important topic. For others, less so. But what we saw around that topic was that its inclusion in the justifications we saw in later rounds was women athletes saying things like, you know, it's not important to me right now, but I can see why it might be in the future. And in reading others people's responses to this question, like I can see, I want to support other women athletes so that they can continue their careers. It's like people's scores changed by seeing how important this topic was to others in the study, because at the end of each round, the athletes get a report out with not everybody's answers, but with summaries around what people rated each topic and then like what some of the justifications were. So they learn from reading their sort of peers' responses, still in an anonymous way though.
Dr. McCleery was so intrigued by the life that the study's findings had taken on. She's not shy to admit that the Delphi study recentered the athlete voice and restructured the eventual findings away from the preconceived lines of questioning that the research team had compiled.
I mean, I think we've hit on, you know, some of the main ones, which were the institutionalized sexism and the team dynamics, these sort of social and environmental factors coming out of something that started very much having a different kind of more medicalized framework. And then also that distinction around mental health and sports performance. I think the other one might be that there were fewer distinctions between groups than we might have thought, right? So that, like, I talked about the one between people who had been pregnant and not been pregnant, that there was a distinction around pregnancy and postpartum. But the other two that remained throughout the study that we sort of never got rid of these statistically significant differences between groups were mental health tools. There was a distinction between summer sport athletes and winter sport athletes, with summer sport athletes rating that higher in every round. So for summer sport athletes, the mental health tools were like just more important. 4.6 in the end to 4.1 for the winter athletes. So that's just interesting. We didn't really have a way to explain that. Like sometimes when there were group differences, we tried to rewrite it so that we addressed everybody's kind of interests so that difference would go away, but we weren't able to do that there. And then this one is really, I think, a profoundly interesting difference is that in institutionalized sexism, in the 2 rounds that was in there was a statistically significant difference between Olympic athletes and Paralympic athletes, with the Paralympic athletes rating that higher, which really does, we do know that more marginalized athletes feel sort of systems of oppression more. And so that's an unfortunate one, but, it's a distinction I think it was good that we were able to raise. And it was also maybe a little bit surprising.
Are you an athlete rehabbing from an injury? Are you a coach or athletic trainer seeking additional support for your injured athlete toolkits? KT Tape has exactly what you need. KT Tape is a rehabilitation tape that helps stabilize and compress sensitive areas of the body during exercise. Apply KT Tape to an area either in pain or in recovery and feel the difference. KT Tape is comfortable, stable, and long-wearing. There's tape for all modes of action, from gentle, which is safe for easy activity and everyday use, to pro extreme, for athletes in moderate to high-impact exercise. KT Tape makes water-resistant tape as well for a more adaptable rehabilitation implementation. KT Tape caters to lifelong athletes and focuses on reducing muscle soreness for all users when worn during exercise and up to 48 hours post. Are you an athlete in need of prescription sports goggles or sunglasses? Today's final sponsor may have just the solution for you. A Sight for Sport Eyes was created when founder Shannon Knight saw a niche that was perpetually going unfulfilled. A Sight for Sport Eyes grew out of a need for education surrounding the impact of sport-related eye injuries and their lasting repercussions. A Sight for Sport Eyes runs like a regular optical practice, not an e-commerce store. Their goal is to give you the same high-quality service and name-brand lenses made by the best optical laboratories in the country, geared specifically for athletes and athletic use cases. If you need new lenses or frames, A Sight for Sport Eyes is the perfect place to get them. The links to BetterHelp.com, Libro FM, KT Tape, and A Sight for Sport Eyes are all in the show notes. Now, let's get back to the episode.
What I hope gets taken away is this idea of co-construction, right? Is that I'm really interested in, like my title, I don't know if you say this at the top of the podcast, remember, but it's like a senior researcher, but also the director of research practice partnerships. So I have a real interest in bridging the gap between research and practice. And so for me, it's really important that the voices of the folks that we most want to impact with our research is represented in the research itself, either the research or the research agenda. So I hope that we can include the voices of coaches, of athletic training and support staff in constructing future research agendas and doing future research, because without them, that translational work that we really need of the information getting into the hands of the people who need it most, it's just harder to do. So if we're building research agendas and research projects around the needs of the folks that are going to be implementing, like, I think we're just taking a step in the right direction to some healing in the space and giving us more of an ability to create those kind of safe spaces that we want athletes to be able to thrive in. So that's really what I'm interested in sort of moving forward.
If you're interested in the findings of this study, the link to the PDF is in the show notes. You can also watch Dr. McCleery and I's full interview at the Closer Mentality Uncensored YouTube channel. The link to that is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for tuning into episode 112 of Closer Mentality. As always, I'm your host, Julia Mellett. See you next week.